Driving at night can be serene and calming, but for some it has turned into a nightmare. This is one such tale. My name is Tom, and I'm an over-the-road truck driver. The stories I'm about to share are from my own experience and those of my fellow drivers, encounters that turned the dark stretches of highway into corridors of terror. The first story begins on Route 13, a desolate highway notorious among truckers for its eerie occurrences. Route 13 winds through miles of dense forest in the eastern United States. Locals say the highway is cursed, haunted by the restless spirits of those who died in tragic accidents over the years. I always considered these tales as mere folklore until one fateful night in October. I was hauling a load from New York to Florida and decided to take Route 13 to save some time. The night was pitch black, the kind of darkness where the headlights only seemed to push against the void rather than illuminate it. The road was deserted, and the only sounds were the hum of my truck's engine and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. Around midnight, I noticed a figure standing by the side of the road. As I approached, my headlights revealed a young woman, drenched from head to toe, her eyes wide with terror. She looked like she had been through hell. Against my better judgment, I pulled over to offer her a ride. She climbed into the cab without a word, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. I asked her where she needed to go, but she remained silent. Her clothes were soaked, and she shivered uncontrollably. I offered her a blanket, and she wrapped it around herself, still not speaking. After a few miles, she finally spoke in a whisper. "Thank you for stopping. I was in a car accident a few miles back. My car went off the road and into the river." I glanced over at her, feeling a chill run down my spine. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes seemed to pierce right through me. I tried to ask her more about the accident, but she just stared ahead, silent once again. Suddenly, she pointed ahead and said, "This is where I need to get off." I pulled over, and she got out without another word. Before I could say anything else, she disappeared into the darkness. The next day, I mentioned the encounter to a local gas station attendant. His face went pale, and he told me that many years ago, a young woman had died in a car accident on Route 13. Her body never recovered from the river. Since then, there had been numerous reports of her ghost hitchhiking along the road, vanishing once she reached the site of her death. A year after my encounter on Route 13, I found myself on another late-night haul, this time across the desolate expanses of the Nevada desert. The night was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. Little did I know, I was about to face another horror on the road. I had been driving for hours without seeing another vehicle, when suddenly, in my rearview mirror, I noticed headlights approaching at an alarming speed. Within moments, a massive truck was tailgating me, its headlights blindingly bright. I tried to maintain my speed and stay calm, but the truck kept inching closer, its horn blaring in long, aggressive bursts. In an attempt to let the truck pass, I moved to the side of the road, but it stayed right behind me, relentlessly honking and flashing its lights. Panic started to set in. Who was driving this truck? Why were they doing this? After what felt like an eternity, the truck finally sped past me, but as it did, I saw that there was no one in the driver's seat. The cab was empty. I slammed on my brakes and watched in disbelief as the phantom truck vanished into the darkness, its taillights fading into the night. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat there for a while, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. When I finally gathered the courage to continue driving, I kept a close eye on my rearview mirror, but the phantom truck never reappeared. Back at a truck stop the next day, I shared my experience with some fellow drivers. One of them, an older man named Joe, nodded grimly. He told me about a similar incident he had encountered years ago on the same stretch of road. According to Joe, the ghostly truck was believed to be the spirit of a trucker who had died in a tragic accident, now doomed to roam the highways, seeking vengeance on the living. Another story comes from my friend Sam, a driver with over 2 decades of experience. He told me about an eerie encounter he had at a rest area in the middle of nowhere off Interstate 5 in California. Sam had been driving all night and decided to pull over at a rest area to catch a few hours of sleep. It was around 3 a.m. and the place was deserted. He parked his truck, locked the doors, and settled in for a nap. Not long after he dozed off, he was awakened by a soft tapping on his window. Groggy and annoyed, he glanced out the window but saw nothing. Assuming it was a tree branch or some animal, he tried to go back to sleep. But then the tapping started again, this time more insistent. He sat up and looked around, but the rest area was still empty. Unease crept over him, but he decided to ignore it and lie back down. Just as he was about to drift off again, the tapping returned, accompanied by a faint whisper. "Let me in." Sam shot up, his heart racing. He peered out the window once more and saw a shadowy figure standing just outside his truck, its face obscured by darkness. He fumbled for his flashlight and shone it out the window, but the figure had vanished. Terrified, Sam decided to leave the rest area immediately. He started his truck and pulled back onto the highway, driving non-stop until he reached the next town. The following morning, he learned from a local diner that the rest area had a dark history. Years ago, a woman had been brutally murdered there, and it was said that her restless spirit still wandered the area, seeking help from unsuspecting travelers. One of the most unsettling stories I've heard comes from a driver named Lisa. She was driving through the mountains of West Virginia on a foggy night when she picked up a hitchhiker, a young man who seemed desperate for a ride. He climbed into the passenger seat without a word, his eyes downcast and his clothes soaking wet. Lisa tried to make conversation, but he remained silent, staring straight ahead. The fog grew thicker, and the winding mountain roads became more treacherous. After several miles, the man finally spoke. He told Lisa that he had been in a car accident and needed to get to the nearest town. She assured him she would get him there safely, but as they rounded a sharp curve, he suddenly screamed, "Look out!" Lisa swerved to avoid an oncoming car, but when she glanced over at her passenger, he was gone. The seat was empty, and there was no sign of him anywhere. Shaken, Lisa pulled over and tried to calm herself. She continued to the next town, where she learned that a young man had died in a car accident on that very road exactly 1 year ago to the day. My own encounters with the supernatural on the road culminated in one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I was driving through the remote back roads of Alabama, far from any town or city. The night was moonless, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. Around midnight, I spotted a figure standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or some other animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing completely still, his head bowed and his arms hanging limply at his sides. I slowed down, thinking he might need help, but as my headlights illuminated him, I saw that his eyes were closed and his mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. He wore tattered clothes and his skin was pale and lifeless. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but I was compelled to stop. I rolled down my window and called out to him, asking if he needed assistance. He didn't respond. Instead, he slowly raised his head, opened his eyes, and stared directly at me. His eyes were empty, devoid of any life or emotion. He took a step towards my truck, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Panicking, I floored the gas pedal and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. The next day, I learned from a local diner that the area was known for strange occurrences. People had reported seeing the same figure, always standing by the road, always staring with those lifeless eyes. One of the last stories comes from an old-timer named Hank, who swore by its truth until the day he retired. Hank was hauling a load through the Rocky Mountains on a winter's night battling heavy snow and treacherous roads. As he navigated a particularly dangerous stretch of highway, his truck suddenly lost power. He managed to steer it to the side of the road before it came to a complete stop. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, he tried his radio and phone, but neither worked. He decided to wait until morning for help. As he settled in, he noticed a faint light coming from the woods. Thinking it might be another traveler or a cabin, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the cold. He trudged through the snow towards the light, which seemed to flicker like a lantern. The closer he got, the more he realized it wasn't a cabin or a vehicle. It was a group of people dressed in old-fashioned clothes gathered around a campfire. As he approached, they turned to look at him, their faces expressionless. He called out to them, but they didn't respond. When he got close enough to see their eyes, he froze in terror. Their eyes were black, completely devoid of any color or light. He stumbled back, realizing these weren't living people. They were spirits, trapped in some kind of eternal limbo. The light from their campfire seemed to draw him in, making it hard to turn away. With a Herculean effort, he broke free from their gaze and ran back to his truck, not stopping until he was safely inside with the doors locked. In the morning, a tow truck arrived, and Hank was able to get back on the road. He never spoke of that night again, except to warn other drivers to stay clear of that stretch of highway, especially during the winter months. These stories are just a few of the countless tales of horror and the supernatural that circulate among truckers and night drivers. The open road can be a place of freedom and adventure, but it also harbors dark secrets and malevolent spirits. As I continue my journeys, I remain vigilant, always aware of the legends and the experiences shared by those who have seen what lies beyond the veil of our world. The road is a place of mystery, where the line between the living and the dead can blur in an instant. So, the next time you find yourself driving down a lonely highway at night, keep your eyes open and your wits about you. You never know what might be waiting just around the bend, lurking in the shadows, or watching from the roadside. In the end, we are all just travelers on the same road, hoping to reach our destination safely. But sometimes, the journey itself becomes the destination, and the stories we gather along the way are what define us. The tales of night drive horror are as varied as the roads we travel. They serve as reminders of the unknown, the unexplained, and the enduring power of human fear. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, these stories tap into something primal, something that makes us question what we know and what we don't. As for me, I'll keep driving, collecting stories, and sharing them with those willing to listen. Because out there, on the open road, the night is dark, and the truth is stranger than fiction.